Everyone, Steve from Talent Scale Group. Wanted to give a quick overview of the most recent blueprint that I've been writing, and it's about the networking architecture for cells. We've been having a lot of discussions and different issues and topics around how one service should communicate with another, if the cell managed domain should be publicly available or should always go to GitLab.com, and how to manage web rules and all that. So I wanted to try and write a blueprint trying to combine all that into a single place and somewhat best practices rather than prescriptive. This is not fully done. This is just the first draft, a very early draft, but I wanted to open it up for discussions, see what people think, and I'll be going on to leave soon, so I probably won't have time to finish all of this myself. So it's more for someone else to pick up if they have the capacity as well. Um, so. There are three main guidelines per se right now. One of them is cross VPC communication in GCP. This means when we have two different VPCs in GCP that want to send requests to one another. A good example of this is when a cell, meaning the Rails application, wants to send a request to the topology service, which is also deployed in GCP via Runway. um, how that should work. Overall, um, it will use Private Service Connect, so everything will be internal. There's no need for going through the public internet. I'll share a diagram because this is not rendering. But then the next part is authentication and authorization, meaning how one service will uh, communicate or authenticate with another service and make sure that they have the correct permissions or don't have more permissions than they should. Um, this will actually depend on MTLS, which is being worked on in a separate blueprint and tangent of this one. Thanks to David Leach. He's owning that part out. And then the third guideline is the cells are not public, but should remain individually accessible. What I mean by this is everything should go through GitLab.com as it is today, right? Meaning um, uh, they don't go through the managed domain, so users can't access the managed domain. They can't circumvent our rate limits, they can't circumvent our firewall rules, and so on and so forth. So keeping these three guidelines in mind, we'll end up with the following diagram as above, meaning a user goes through GitLab through Cloudflare, GitLab.com domain, ends up through the worker, and then the HTTP router, and then they will all reach to the correct cell. So here we can see that each cell will have an individual domain, so it's still an individual identity, but the worker will know that, but they will be secured via MTLS because a big part of the MTLS is that each workload has its own identity. Um, and the HTTP router is a workload, right? So it has an identity to connect to all of these, and we'll know that we're allowed to access it. Same thing for the topology service between HTTP router, and so that's the part around individual cell accessibility. Going a bit backwards, we already covered the part around authentication and authorization. Here we set MTLS. The interesting part is the GitLab operator / internal tooling. Right now, this is the part that's not fully clear yet, but um, will be we ideally we should still be able to access the cell via the managed domain inside of the tenant model, and um, that will hopefully done through an identity provider, something like Okta, for example. So when you type in the domain for this one, it will be protected via Okta. And I'll go into the implementation detail a bit later. A user, when they load a website, they will see the IDP provider, and any service will end up using MTLS. So diving deep into each topic a bit more. So the cross VPC communication in GCP, as I mentioned, will use Private Service Connect, and this will give us the benefit of using the internal backbone of GCP rather than going to the public internet. And for people that are familiar more with AWS side of things, it's like private link in AWS basically. And there are multiple ways how we can deploy Private Service Connect. The first one is the one that's not shown here, which is the endpoint one, and the other one is through a load balancer, a centralized load balancer, then going through a backend, then going through the service. And the reason we think a backend with a centralized load balancer is better is because we centralize all the requests in a single place, meaning we have observability, we have logs, and we have more benefits that will be explained in here. And we have to keep in mind all these load balancers need to be global load balancers, not regional ones, because remember we're running in two different regions and cells for geo reasons. And even the topology service is running on two regions right now. The authentication and authorization, again, this is being worked on in the blueprint, MTLS blueprint. But here we're explaining a bit more that each workload needs to have an identity, right? Like each workload needs to identify itself. So when it communicates to another service, that service is responsible of saying, are you allowed? Are you an identity that I know about? And are you allowed to do the action? Meaning, for example, going back to the original one, I this cell can claim a username, so it can claim a username, but the same username, for example, username A, this cell cannot delete that username because it is claimed by this cell, and the identity is around this one. So it also manages authorization, um, um, and that's up to the service itself to implement authorization, not through the MTLS. The MTLS certificate is there just to identify someone. And it's up to the service to implement the authorization part. And then, as I mentioned, the cells are not public, but remain individually accessible. So there's two kind of clients, if you want to call it that, to a specific cell, either to a human operator, which would be us trying to access the cell directly, or a service like HTTP router trying to access a service directly. Now, both of these clients, what I'm thinking that we should try and explore a bit more is Cloudflare Zero Trust, because it will give us the ability to, as I said, protect each managed domain through Cloudflare and use the identity provider like Okta. So we have to log into Okta to access a cell. And I'm not saying that we log into the cell and use a username into the cell, but this is like an IDP provide proxy, just like, for example, if you're familiar with the identity provider proxy from GCP, where you first log into with Google and then you access the actual resource. Um, and then the service is, again, using Zero Trust, Cloudflare Zero Trust with MTLS. So it allows us to provide certificates. And this works with Cloudflare workers and other services that we want to. So um, yeah, again, this is not fully fleshed out. This is more like a way to start the conversation. So feel free to suggest things nothing is set in stone, so we can move things into a different direction if there's a good reason. And yeah, let me know what you think. Have a nice day.